One, two. இருக்கா? செக் செக்.
share it. Hello? Hello? Okay. Ada berapa roving mic? Ada berapa? 2 ke 3? 3. So, because it's quite big, right? So you all need to position yourselves. One here, one here.
Hello, hello. 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 Hello.
Hello? No, so what I'll do is after I finish, I'll pass to them. Then the rest you all rove around. Kan? Mm. 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 Yeah. Okay. First half done. Okay.
1, 2, test, test.
嗯 Yes, 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 please. Siapa? Farhan yang tall tu. Ah. How's the audio, boleh? Too loud ke atau okay? Okay.
Test, test, test. Test, test. Test, test. Test, test. Test. Test.
Weini. Just in case.
Check, check, test, test mic.
Natter.
Ada bang?
And are we doing 30?
Ada.
No lah. Are we calling? Are
Check.
we doing 30 or should I just say 20?
Oh, check mic, test. Sekarang? Sekarang?
Yeah.
Ada.
I'll just say we only got
Nak up ke? Naik. Check.
and about because we got the
Test 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check. Ada satu lagi.
Mic check 1 2. Mana weh?
Mic
Check
check
1
1 2.
Cubaan suara 1 2 3. Dengar tak weh? Weh?
Cek mana? Kita bang. Check 1 2.
staying one night. Yeah. Schedule is just like a blur. Yeah. Chairman of the state. The Pahan is doing the century, Tiger century this weekend. The Mangku. Oh yeah, he's quite passionate. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not doing the talking, kan?
I don't.
Oh, Macam untuk mi dengan untuk Umar. Okay, so we may need another chair.
No, not for Daniel.
We may need
Daniel.
another chair.
Okay, members of the media, thank you. So, to address your questions on the newly launched National Energy Transition Roadmap, are we calling it NATR? NATR. Okay, so we have Yang Berhormat Rafizi Ramli for Minister of Economy, and he's flanked by Yang Berhormat Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad, Minister for NREC, together with Datuk Nur Azmi, Secretary General for Economy, together with Daniel Rashdan for in the Energy Commission, as well as Bursa Malaysia, Tan Sri Abdul Wahid, and Dr. Umar. So we only have about 20 minutes, so let's just keep the session tight, keep your questions on the roadmap, and if you could just help us identify yourself before you pose the questions. So with that, Yang Berhormat Rafizi, let me turn it over to you to say a few words.
So this is always a challenge with this. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. We have taken a slightly different approach when it comes to policy rollout. We wanted to balance between building the momentum and completing the full picture, and that's why today we launch the first part of NECTAR because in our assessment, it is important to get the excitement and the buy-in, especially from the industry players first, and to bring the attention to Malaysia's ambition. And within a month, we will roll out the second part of NECTAR, which will unveil the kind of policy and ecosystem enablers that support this. So I'm sure some questions would have been on such enablers. I mean, I can generally allude to it, but the whole idea is to build that momentum, get the excitement, and then within a month we will complete with the rest of the ecosystem on policies, on funding, on the legislation, and so on. So I hope that sets the scene for the Q&A today. If there are any questions, please do. If possible, please ask Nick, not me. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Hi, afternoon, YB, YB Rafizi, YB Nick, Joseph Sipalan from SCMP. We're very interested in what you announced earlier about the domestic rooftop program. So I've just got like a few questions on that point. Firstly, how soon and where will the government start the public rollout of the private housing rooftop leasing program? Second, do you have an estimate for how much the initial rollout will cost and how much it would cost the government for a nationwide rollout? And thirdly, how much power is estimated will be generated in the initial rollout and eventually nationwide, and what percentage of that would be of the total national power generation? Thank you.
I think you should be in Energy Commission. uh, the focus is basically on large-scale housing development first. That's why we work with Sime Darby Properties, because it is something that can be pulled off commercially by large-scale township without government's funding. Because what we have now is the disconnect between the demands and the so-called bureaucracy around it. Medium and high-end properties, usually the buyers would want to have solar. I mean, there's already a buy-in. It's just that the process now is the application for quota has to be made individually. So it becomes quite restrictive for property developers, large-scale property developers like Sime Darby and I hope the others, because they can't package the whole thing as part and parcels of the house. Basically, the best thing that they can do is that we will be able to install solar, but we have to wait for you to apply first, and then you come back to me and talk. So what we want to focus in the early parts is to allow more and more of such integrated large-scale urban development to include solar in their whole pricing package, because then it will allow them to look into energy storage solution as well, because it cannot happen without ESS. And that's part of the reasons why we want to do this, is because we also want to expedite the technology and application for battery storage.
Yeah.
For the individual rooftop, I think that will come as and when the single market aggregator becomes operational. And once that is operational, and then is naturally it will expedite more independent retail markets, and I think the market will work by itself from then.
Sorry, just to add, one of the things I think that will enable this to happen faster is because as we move towards more targeted subsidies, those who are at the top of the household income level, they will be, the tariff that they pay will be closer to market. There'll be less subsidies for them. So now there's an incentive for them to actually go for rooftop solar. And people tend to underestimate that rooftop solar can overtake even large-scale or utility-size solar. If you look in certain states in Australia, in Germany, rooftop solar has even surpassed those installations. So I think that's where we see now in Malaysia we haven't really tapped, because when you talk about large-scale solar, there are certain limitations of land size and the cost of land.
So basically, to answer, we feel that that government policy of allowing first self-contained renewable energy generation, and secondly, government's policy on retargeting subsidy and realigning tariff, and thirdly is the government's policy to allow for a single market aggregator towards a much higher RE capacity. All this will allow a market mechanism to do the funding. It's not as if that the government has to put money on people's rooftops. The market mechanism will take its own course, because the economics now make sense with the combination of all these policy change. That then allow the government to focus on grid upgrades and grid infrastructure. So, going forward in the next 20 to 30 years, much of government's efforts in terms of funding, in terms of allocation, is to bring up the grid readiness to take up these new RE capacities, including from solar rooftops. Yeah.
So
With the Elmina, or you're talking about in total?
the pioneer one that's going to be done will be at with Sime Darby will be at Elmina and Bandar Bukit Raja. So that one is up to 10 kilowatt solar capacity per house. So it's 4.5 megawatts across 450 homes. That's the pilot lah.
And I think, if you want to see the projection, how much this will come on stream, I think that's why it's important to demonstrate that it is doable with the pilot first. Then other property players basically will come. And then from there, after a while, give it some time, then we will be able to project and to assess the kind of growth and installed capacity better, because there's no point basically saying that anything else is hypothetical now. So let's see what will be followed by the first pilot, and we'll be able to see how other property developers take up. And from there, I think within a year, we will be able to see how much growth the solar rooftops capacity will affect and will contribute towards our netters target by 2050.
Just to add to both YB Rafizi and YB Nick, YB Nick mentioned Australia as an example. So, of course, we don't have estimations or target on rooftop yet, but we can look at other countries. So if you look at Australia, the current installed capacity on rooftop solar is something like 28 gigawatts. It is very, very high, and apparently it's only 1 in 3 households that has it. So they have a lot more capacity. But then Malaysia, our population is more than Australia. And most of that population resides in landed households. So I think the potential for Malaysia is tremendous.
Yeah, no more questions?
Hi, I have one. Samantha from Eco Business. So I'm looking at the NETR, and I noticed there are champions listed, specifically companies for each of the specific levers. So I just want to understand how these champions were chosen and what are their roles. Are they actually going to be recommending sort of policies, or policy enablers that will lead to better policies being developed? And how are other players going to be involved in this? Because I noticed that Sime Darby is sort of the only property developer listed in terms of helping with residential rooftop solar. So where do the other property developers or providers come in?
It was a bottom-up approach. What we did was we wanted to push the scaling up of energy transition. So we had, I think, a series of workshops where we open up to as many industry players as possible. And from there, we went through, and it's very much from the industry. It's actually not from the government per se. Government should not take credit and say that, okay, this happens because we wanted it. What happened was that all these projects have been in the pipeline already by these companies or by these ministries or agencies. It's just that because they were not approached holistically as part of a national project, they all have a lot of challenges taking off the ground here and there. So the timeline was different because they foresee that they had to go through some policy changes at the government level, and then that might drag for 1 or 2 years. So as we went through the inventories of all these projects that already exist in our system, in our economy, that allow us to work with the industry to group them into those levers. So that's how we came up with the levers, because we assessed the readiness level for this project to take off, including in terms of the financing. And then we work with them to see what are the immediate policy changes that had to happen. And that was the reason why we made some of those decisions at the government level. And it wasn't specific, it was quite general to make sure that 2 or 3 general policy tweaks will cover and enable as many of these catalytic projects as possible. So in the case of Sime Darby, they have been wanting to do this and have sent requests to governments for some time, actually. So that's why they are ahead, I suppose, than others, because they have been planning this for a while. It's just that before this, the process was that individual home buyers have to apply the quota individually, so it could never take off. So when we gather industry players from different sectors into those workshops, of course, these kind of projects suddenly got resurfaced much quicker. So it wasn't that these companies or agencies were selected. They were championing these on their own before. So what NATA will be able to do is to elevate their projects to the national level, and therefore it will facilitate them for those who have not secured funding to secure funding. And in the case of Khazanah UEM Itramas, the 1 gigawatt, for example, they work very closely with my ministry. And having that national focus and national tag, that this is a national scale project, obviously facilitate them to connect with international investors and so on. And some semblance of a part of a national policy also allows them to tap, for example, into international green fund. So that's how it works. I welcome a lot more any companies who actually see the 10 flagship projects and the 10 levers and say, hey, I'm actually doing something even better than this. I want to come on board. We welcome that because as it is so far, government do not need to inject anything. It's just that basically bringing them together to expedite these projects and to facilitate whatever we need to facilitate.
Okay, that will be the last question for us.
May I?
2. First, last one.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Adam here from The Edge, YB. I have a few questions. Number one, in relation to the industrial RE zone, integrated RE zone, are you able to share some details, probably just to get a flavor of what to expect? And number two, on the integrated solar park by TNB, it mentioned 5 sites. Have TNB identified these sites? And number 3, on the EECA, can you share details on whether this will be tabled later this year? Yeah. And what will be there in the act? Yeah.
Okay, I'll answer first the easiest one, the EECA. The Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act, it will be tabled in Parliament this year, in the next sitting. So basically what it entails is that it will allow, it will require establishments of a certain size. They have to go through energy audits to make sure that how they consume their energy is efficient. So that is an important part when you talk about energy transition, because then we can reduce the demand for energy. And we have actually seen quite a bit of that as well, not through legislation, because that's not in place yet, but when we actually drastically increase the tariff for high and medium voltage, we have seen many companies, after complaining, are now installing more renewable energy solar, as well as installing energy efficiency measures to cut down their costs. So I think this will be the icing on the cake. As you are aware, it's been, I think, 6-7 years perhaps in the works, EECA. So we hope that this will finally complete the whole thing on energy efficiency.
On those 2 projects, the specific RE zone and then TNBs, I mean, I do get updates because we work closely, but I think for the details, it's best that you talk to these, project owners, because I also don't want to be to give the impression that ministries now run private projects. But what we do is to encourage more private sectors to get involved and use RE to run and market sustainable industrial zones. We know that there are a lot of interest, especially from international companies that require RE 100 certification. But if governments were to do this ourselves, it becomes very costly, and then it will take some time. So with the decision to allow for self-contained, willing seller, willing buyer arrangement, it makes this special RE zone possible. Because what happens was Khazanah and UEM work with ITRAMAS, who already run some LSS, for them to develop this. And the consortium basically work to bring the off-taker, to secure the off-taker. They also work to make sure that there is an off-taker if there is an export to Singapore. And they package everything together, and then they also source for the project financing. So it's not so much about the details. That one, I think it's best to ask DMB and Khazanah, let them run their projects. But from government's perspective, we would like to see more and more RE zone that attracts these international companies that seek RE certification, RE 100 certification. And it's best to be done by the private sector rather than government. Last question, because we are starting at 3.
Hi, YB. Ram here from Bloomberg. Just wanted to get an idea. When you spoke about the integrated plant, a number was given, 1 megawatts, right? So recently we...
Well, you mean the one, that's 1 gigawatt.
Oh, sorry, 1 gigawatt, yes. Yeah. So then if you look at the whole plan, by 2050, we're aiming to achieve 70% in renewable energy mix. So with all these projects that you're now announcing, is there a medium-term sort of goal that probably can be achieved in the next 10 years or 5 years? Do you have a number in mind? Because 2050 is some way away. But are we crossing a 30% threshold soon, or do we see us crossing a 40% threshold soon with these projects that you're announcing, not just in phase 1, but in phase 2 as well?
Well, we have a number. It's just that, okay, if you notice, we keep looking at each other because these numbers are national grid planning numbers. So, I don't know whether we want to bandy this freely because these numbers goes to cabinet every year to be approved, and it's actually official secret act. Those documents.
There is a target.
There is a target.
My RER, yes, that was the last target.
Correct. So the
40%.
Correct. There is an annual planning.
Yeah.
There's an annual planning process called JPAD that looks at the demand profile and then the generation mix required to fulfill that. That does go to cabinet. It must be first cleared with the Ministry of NRECC, McNasby first. So until and such time, it is actually under wraps at the moment, to be very honest. But one of the challenges in answering your question is demand is expected to, forget supply for now, but demand is expected to also ramp up because of EV adoption, for example. Everyone will be start plugging in, so suddenly demand will go up. This afternoon, hyperscalers are going to come. One plant is already 200-300 megawatt each. So these will completely change the landscape. The next JPAD is, in a way, a clear departure from the previous JPAD last year, just because of that. And that we have yet to present to Nick Nazmi. He hasn't seen it yet. So I need to chair a few, there's a demand forecast committee I need to chair, then I need to present it to YB Nick, and so on and so forth. And then to cabinet.
Yeah, so to sum up, it's like this, to sum up, it's like this. We set the ambition because the energy target for 2050 is very much tied to our net zero commitment. And that is part of the national energy policy, which is binding to the government. Everything else has to be adjusted to achieve that. So when we push the target from 40% to 70%, it will filter through over the years, and it will govern how Energy Commission decides what kind of capacity can be allowed to be installed. You know. The problem is, if you look at, for example, today's announcements with Khazanah Intramas, is 1 gigawatt. And 1 gigawatt is huge compared to the largest capacity that we have now, which is around 70 megawatt. I think the largest is around 70 megawatt solar farm in Malaysia. That's easily about 15 times of the size, you know. So we have to go through this stage of seeing how the market responds to NETA, because that will allow us a much better assessment of the supply and demand. So that's why, you know, if the price is asking what is going, I think we take the bold step of pitching that we want to lead the energy transition. And that will spur the supply and demand, and that will allow us to be able to map the planning and the numbers better for 5, 10, 15 years. I thought this is already last. It's best to actually go through because they are waiting down. All right?
Okay, so that will be for the next session, which will be happening in the ballroom now. So thank you very much, ministers and panelists. Members of the media, so do head back to the ballroom for the second half. But in between, if you want to file your stories, we do have a lounge area here, right next to this room. And for any questions, just reach out to the Ministry of Economy, Farhan, or ourselves. Thanks.